Hey folks, in this video we're going to be discussing array formulas. Array formulas are a really impactful function that exists within Google Sheets that enables you to apply values and functions to multiple cells at one time. And the way that we're going to demonstrate this today is by nesting lookup functions within an array formula in order to automate the application of the function. So we are going to demonstrate how to use array formula. We're going to deconstruct array formula, and then we are going to run through 3 examples of using array formula with a lookup function. The first being XLOOKUP, the second being VLOOKUP, and the third being VLOOKUP when the lookup column is not the first range of the data set. So in a previous video, we used this data in columns A through F in order to join additional information about each country in the data set. So we have this data tab, and then we have a lookups tab, and both tables in those tabs have information about the countries. So we pulled in the abbreviation and the code from the lookups table into the data table. And the way that we did that was by using VLOOKUP. What happens though is over time, additional pieces of information are going to be added to the data table. And what will happen is if, for example, we have more information about the United States, you'll notice that these cells are not updating with lookup values, right? So if we want to do that, we have to drag down the formulas in order to activate those lookups. And the challenge here is we do not want to be burdened with manually moving information. In most circumstances, our aspiration is to establish automated workflows so that you feed information to one spot and then it is transformed as a result of moving into the environment. That's where array formula comes in. Rather than having to have a VLOOKUP in each cell in the data set, array formula will allow us to dynamically apply the lookup so that we no longer have to manually move the information. So I'm going to clear out this United States here, and I am also going to clear out these lookups. And what we're going to do is we're going to use equal sign and then start typing in array, and then array formula will be the first formula that pops up. The documentation in here is not super straightforward in terms of this application, but effectively what it allows you to do is to establish an array or a range of cells that you want to apply something to. So in this case, we are going to be nesting a VLOOKUP within an array formula in order to return values against an entire column. So we have to make one adjustment to our VLOOKUP, which is in our first example, when we were doing VLOOKUP, we would reference individual cells. So this would look like us referencing A2 as our search key. We are no longer going to be doing that. Instead of referencing a single cell, we're going to be referencing an array. And in this case, our array is column A, right? So we're referencing the entire column because we want to apply this VLOOKUP to the entire column. So then we're going to move into our range, which is in the lookups tab. This is not going to change. We are going to be referencing columns A through D, and then we want to pull in the abbreviation first. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit column 3, and then we're going to enter false, and we're going to hit enter. Cool. And now you'll see we've returned results for every single row in our data set, and we're also getting NAs in here. The reason that we're getting this error message is because this data doesn't exist in our lookups table, right? There's nothing in there that's null. So VLOOKUP is attempting to look up against a null value, and it's saying there's nothing in here. But if we added in United Kingdom, you'll see that this dynamically responded. So now we're pulling in data about the UK. Same thing for Canada and the United States. And then if we even like go over a couple cells and we enter in United States, you'll see that that value is populating. So you see now that like we have impacted the entire data range, right? We are no longer just referencing a single cell. We are referencing the entire range of cells. So what I'm going to show you now is how to clean this up a little bit so that you don't have to have all these NAs in here. There's no right or wrong way to do this. This is just the way that I do it. I've seen some other people who do it differently, but I like to use if statements. So I'll say if A through A equals nothing, then give me nothing. And then I'll also wrap my VLOOKUP in an if error statement. And what that does is it will provide us with all blank cells down here, right? So now what'll happen is if I go down into row 22 and I write Canada in there, you'll see that Canada will pop up. If I type in United States, that'll pop up. And then if I enter in my name, you'll see nothing shows up because that's throwing an error. That's not in the data set, but we're not getting that NA in there because we have an if error statement in there. One other thing that I'd like to point out is we have a header row up top here, right? And we're getting the word abbreviation in there. The reason that we're getting abbreviation is because the word country appears in the data and in the lookups table. So you can see in here, this is country, this is pulling in abbreviation. There's going to be some instances where your data tables have different names. And when that happens, like if let's say instead of having region or instead of country, we have region, you'll see now we're getting a null value in there because region doesn't have a value in our lookups tab. So the way that I'll sometimes work around that is I'll just define if A through A equals region, then give me abbreviation. And then boom. Now you'll see region is populating in there, or abbreviation is populating in there, even though region is the column header. And then finally, if you wanted to have the country code applied in, what you could do is you could just go over here and then you change this to a number 2. And then boom, you now have an automated set of data that will dynamically respond to new values being written into your data sheet so that you no longer have to go in there and pull down VLOOKUP values into each cell. I encourage you to consider this into your workflows, especially if you use a lot of lookups, whether it's XLOOKUP or VLOOKUP, because it's just going to save you a ton of time. I used to have a project where every Monday morning I would go in and I would drag down index match and VLOOKUPs in there, and once I started applying array formulas, it saved me so much time because things would just automatically update without me having to go in there, and it was the first step towards true automation for a lot of my environments because I no longer needed to have any involvement in them updating. Which is something that I will be talking quite a bit about, which is intentional design in your data workbooks to ensure that you have pipelines and processes for transforming your data based upon what your needs are. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we are going to run examples on how to apply array formulas to XLOOKUP using a set of data that has a list of names. And the reason that we're doing this is because XLOOKUP is going to provide you with the greatest amount of flexibility if you are looking for a value that is not the first column in your data set. So what we're going to do in here is we are going to start by typing in array formula, and then we're going to go with XLOOKUP. And I have a video about XLOOKUP, so if you want to dive deeper into what's going on in here and all that type of stuff, that's available to you. For the purposes of this, I'm going to kind of move quickly in line with array formula. So what we're going to do is we're going to enter in column A through A for our search key, because remember, array formula is looking for an array of cells. And then we are going to go to our data set. And what we need to identify now is our lookup range. Our lookup range needs to have the same value as our search key. So that means that we're going to want to use column number 2 or column B in our data set, because that's where our names are. And then we are going to select column A because we want to return the country names. And we're going to hit enter, and you'll see that we'll get a bunch of NAs in here. That's because it is attempting to look up null values. So we're going to go back in here. We're going to use an if statement, and we're going to use an if error statement, and we're going to hit enter. And now you can see we have all of our regions in here relative to each person's name. In the event that we have a name in here that does not exist, you'll see it's not returning any values. If we enter in a name that is in there, we get a value. The cool thing about XLOOKUP is you can also enter in an error message as part of this optional argument here. Because I have an if error, we don't need to use that, but if you want to, you could remove your if error there, and we're also going to remove this parentheses. And now you'll see Joe comes up with an error. What you could do instead is you could go in here and you could say double quote, which is null, same thing as your if error, and then you'll see that responds like that as well. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we already did how to do VLOOKUP, which is on our data tab. We're going to do VLOOKUP when the lookup value is not the first column in the range, right? So if we try to do just a straight VLOOKUP against our data, we're not going to get any results, because the VLOOKUP requires the first column in your range to be the lookup value. So because name is the second column in this data set, we can't use VLOOKUP without augmenting it. And the way that we're going to augment it is by using an array. An array is different than an array formula. An array formula allows you to impact an entire array of cells, whereas an array allows you to restructure your data. I have a video about that if you want to dive a little bit deeper into it. But for our purposes, we're going to do a lot of the same things that we did when we were doing VLOOKUP on our first tab. But what we're going to do is, instead of referencing an individual cell, we're going to be referencing column A. And then we're going to be using a curly bracket. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to our data tab. And we are going to highlight column B, and then we're going to use a comma, and we're going to highlight column A. And what this does is this establishes a new data array where column B is next to column A, and thus column B is now the first column in the range, and column A becomes the second column in the range, which will then allow us to reference the second column, which is column A, and then we are going to say that it is unordered, and we are going to hit enter. And now you can see we're getting our countries in here as part of a VLOOKUP. We're also getting those NAs in here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in if error, and that cleans everything up for us. And then, I also put in the if statements. So if A through A equals null, give me null. You know, I've always kind of done it as like an efficiency thing. It may not really matter, to be honest with you, but this way, if there's like nothing in there, then it just stops. But if error does the same thing in there. So the last thing that I want to note about this with array formula is that much like in our array video when we talked about these curly brackets, the array formula is also case sensitive, or it's like it's sensitive to the number of values or rows that you have in your array. So you need to make sure that it's even. One of the things that I've witnessed in my working with, you know, my peer group is individuals will like to use this filter icon up here, right? And what they'll do is you know, they'll want to sort things A through Z, right? That was a bad example because there's a bunch of null stuff in here. So like we'll sort it Z through A. So you can see like now this data set is going from Z to A. And then what we could do is we could also do this A to Z, and now we're doing this in alphabetical order. They like to filter data rows like that, or data ranges like that. And the challenge that can arise when they do that is I'm gonna go back to my data tab in order to show this, because I think the example will be a little bit better. Is if your array is not in the header row, so for example, I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to delete it. Actually, I want to make sure I highlighted all of it, copied all of it. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to delete it. And then you see everything goes away. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it in here. This is going to give me an error message. And the reason this is going to give me an error message is because I'm in cell G2 at present. You can see up here it's G2, and I have this in here. And I'm referencing an array that is column A through A. And at present, there are 1,000 rows in my spreadsheet. Because I'm in cell G2, that only has 999 rows to work with. So it wants to apply it to 1,000 rows, but it only has 999 rows to work with. So what you need to do when you get this error like this is you can see it's saying here, you need to insert more rows because it's expecting 1,000 opportunities. And this is going to put you in a circular dependency, because if you add one row, it's going to continually need one more row in order to try and match up the data range that you're trying to fill in. So in order to account for the equal amount of rows that you need to make sure that your array aligns with the range that you're operating in. So once I change it to start at cell A2 instead of A1 or A through A, you'll see that my array will then return values in here. Now, the issue that we are going to run into related to filtering is that now that we exist in this array formula exists in cell A2, what's going to happen now is if cell A2 gets sorted by way of this data range getting sorted, then it will no longer impact cell A2 through A. So I'm gonna change my inventory and I'm gonna sort it A through Z. And now you can see that array formula that had previously been in cell A2 is now in cell A12, which means that the array formula will impact everything under cell A12, but you can see we have about 10 rows of actual data, not including our headers, that no longer has an abbreviation showing up for it. So what happens too is, like, if we try to like lock it in to cell A2, right? So these dollar signs mean that the data range is locked. If we do that, right, so we're in A2 right now, and we are going to sort the inventory column A through Z, which then results in Gale going down here, you'll see that then we're getting into that issue that we had before, where we have an uneven amount of rows relative to the amount of values that are going into the range. So then our array is no longer working. So in my opinion, the best way to avoid all of this is to put your array formulas into your header rows. That way, if an individual aspires to, my bad, sorry. I'm going to change these to be A through A. Cool. So now you can see that, like, if we go in here and we try to sort this A through Z, doesn't matter, right? Same way that this country code, which, sorry, I should have noticed this earlier. The same way that this country code column has not been impacted this entire time is now how the abbreviation column is functioning, right? Where you can sort these as any way you want to, right? Like now I'm going to start sorting this name column, and you can see that my lookups are not changing, right? Like they are all remaining consistent with one another. So long story short, array formula is really powerful, and it is going to allow you to cut down on manual work, which should always be your goal anytime you're approaching any type of data task. You also want to think about how to implement these things so that if you do provide them to your peers or collaborators or stakeholders, or clients, or whatever it ends up being, that you don't allow them to take actions that have unintentional consequences, right? So you want to ask yourself, okay, once I give them this data, what are they going to want to do with it? And you should aspire to empower them to explore their curiosity. So in summary, what we did today was we introduced array formulas, which are a very helpful tool in order to automate your environments. We touched on the use of if functions, if error functions, and then we walked through examples on how to use array formulas with VLOOKUP, as well as XLOOKUP, as well as VLOOKUP when the lookup value is not in the first row of the data. I hope you found this resource to be helpful. As I've mentioned, I have other videos about lookups and arrays and all that type of stuff, so please check out my channel if you'd be interested in learning more there. I'm always interested in feedback. There is no one way to do any of this type of stuff, and if you have an alternative way to do it, I think it's just beneficial for everybody for you to share it, so please feel free to use the comments section or reach out to me. And I wish you the best of luck in your data journey, and I hope I've been of some help.